of goals.
And, of course, we talked about this. It's going to be a minute, as rosters continue to settle down and as teams get in flux before you really start to get a group chemistry, and even that changes throughout the season, but you get that camaraderie. And that was one of the things we talked about going on the road multiple times here to start the beginning of this season like the Monsters are, is that perhaps that's a good thing because you're on the road, you're away from home, everything's kind of compartmentalized, and you're all on the same page and you're in the same boat together, and it kind of gives you a little bit of that early season, bonding or team building there as you go these few weekends here, heading out on the road, each one until the end of the month.
And I think it's a great thing to be able to go on the road early in the season. We've talked about this time and time again. Now, obviously with 2 out of the 5 straight road games in the books, the Monsters obviously need to go into this weekend with there's a lot riding on this weekend because they've now lost 3 straight games, and they would like to, and 2 of those on the road to start off this 5-game road swing. So that kind of magnifies these 3 games coming up against Grand Rapids, Milwaukee, and Rockford, just because the Monsters are now 0-2 on this road trip. But I think there is something to be said for getting on the road for an extended period of time early in the season, work the bugs out on the road. Guys can get to know each other on the road, and when you're on the road, you're either at the hotel, you're at the arena, or you're sleeping, or you're in transit someplace, and that gives guys a lot of time to just get to know one another, and that's the kind of thing you can't really even put a price on that, and it's never going to show up in a box score anywhere or anything like that. But that time together goes a long way, and it gives everybody a chance to focus and really get on the same page, because there are a lot of guys who are playing together for the first time. One thing that what really the big bright spot from last week was that Calvin Pickard got called up to the National Hockey League, and it was just a crazy day for him. Ended up making his National Hockey League debut on Thursday. He actually flew to Chicago with us. He was on a plane at 8:40 a.m. that left for Chicago. We got to Chicago, got to the hotel. He went and had lunch, and then got the call, had to go get his bag because there was an injury in Colorado. So then he had to go right to Ottawa to meet the Avalanche there, and then he was going to back up, and then Rito Berra, the backup goalie for the Avalanche who started that night, he was involved in a collision in the first couple of minutes of the game, and Calvin Pickard went in there and made his debut. And obviously unpredictable the way it all went down, but I have a feeling sometimes that's just the way it happens. And then he got the start on Saturday and stopped 33 of 36, lost 3-2 to one of the best goalies in the world, the Montreal Canadiens, Carey Price. And the Canadiens are off to a great start this season, but Calvin Pickard's the first guy, for the Monsters this season to get that call and make his NHL debut, and you hope first of many, because it's always fun to be able to see a guy get to go up and realize that dream. And then because 2 goalies were injured in Colorado, Sammy Adicalio got the call too, so they're both currently up there.
That's awesome. But that story, that's the one where sometimes when those guys have that crazy, hey, you want to hear how my first time went? Let me tell you, we were here. That's a great story. And it's crazy while it's happening, but that's one of those ones that later on you look back and you go, wow, man, that was an experience for sure to go through. And it's always great to see the Monsters, that are representing up on the next level as well there. Talk to me a bit. I know we're talking about a handful of games here, but early season for the Monsters early on. I know Mike Scarbosa leads the team with 4 points, I believe, early on. But talk to me about some of the things you've seen early. Maybe if you're the Monsters, if you're Coach Chenoweth, obviously you're not panicking about anything, but what are you focused on right now, perhaps buttoning down and shoring up as you head into this now three-game weekend road trip coming up this weekend?
Yeah, a couple things going off of that. I mean, first of all, from a team perspective, I think you have to place a lot of importance on this weekend coming up here, because you look at the stretch that lies ahead. You've got in Grand Rapids Friday, tough opponent. The Monsters are 1-1 against them this season. Those are the first 2 games of the year, but it's probably going to be a sellout crowd on a Friday night in Grand Rapids. I know they do their $2 beer nights on Friday night in Grand Rapids. It always brings out a full crowd and a loud crowd. And then Saturday night in Milwaukee, and the Admirals are off to a 4-0 start. They've come out of the gate really hard. They're scoring a lot of goals, so that's going to be a tough matchup. And then Rockford on a Sunday, It doesn't matter who you play in the third game of 3-3 on the road. That's a real physical test anytime you're in that situation. And the Monsters in Rockford have had a lot of entertaining games over the course of the last few seasons. And Rockford, again, that's a place. It's a loud place, no matter how many people they have in there. It's a loud venue to play in, and the fans can be hostile at times. So, it's a big test for the team this weekend. And after this weekend, the Monsters will have seen everybody in the Midwest Division at least one time. I've said it before. I think this is the toughest division in the American Hockey League, without question. And there's not a lot of margin for error. And the fact that the Monsters lost to Chicago those 2 games last weekend, you want to make sure you come out and make a big statement here this weekend. Because this is going to be a real battle that's going to last the full 76 games as far as winning the Midwest Division. These are 4. This is a group of 5 very good teams that make up this Midwest Division. Those other 4 teams are all solid. So, so there's a lot riding on this weekend. Your first look at Milwaukee and Rockford, and then you're seeing Grand Rapids for already the 3rd time. And then after that, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but the following weekend, the Monsters come back home for a pair of games on that Friday, Saturday, and it's the defending champion Texas Stars, who look like they're going to be a powerful team once again. Maybe not as powerful as last year. We'll have to wait and see. But they've come out of the gate very strong this season as well. So you've got 3-3 on the road and 2 games against the defending champs coming up here in your next 5, and that's a real test for any team. So the Monsters have to put a lot of importance on these next few games, even though it's early in the season. You and I have beaten it like a dead horse over the last couple seasons about how important these points in October can be, especially when you get into a race late in the season. From an individual perspective, you touched on Mike Scarbosa, and I think he's been very good. It doesn't matter what situation it's been. He's been solid to start the season. 4 points in 4 games. They're all assists, but you think back to those preseason games. He was scoring goals, had 4 goals in 2 preseason games. So he was able to take that success from the preseason games, move it into the regular season. He's making things happen out there offensively, and sometimes that can be tough to do. How many times in baseball do you see a guy hit .450 in the spring, and then all of a sudden real games start, and the guy couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat? But Mike Scarbosa has been very good to start the season. He was making things happen in those preseason games. He's making stuff happen offensively in the regular season, and that's something you certainly like to see. He missed about 30 games in the middle of last season with an injury, so just kind of once he came back, kind of took him a little bit to get going. Then all of a sudden the season's over with, and based on what we saw from his All-Star, has incredible offensive ability, and it's just good to see him getting on the score sheet and showing it quite a bit here early on in the season. There are a lot of guys. Some of the defensively for the Monsters, I think Carl Stollery has been rock solid the last few seasons. Fans expect that, and he sometimes it's he does it quietly, but Carl he's as solid a defenseman as you'll find in the AHL, and you like to see him. He scored a couple goals on opening night. He's been good. Max Noro was paired with Stollery for the first couple of games. He's a veteran guy who's got a little bit of National Hockey League experience, coming back over from Europe after the last few years. Fans are going to like him. He's a very solid defenseman as well. And Stephen Elliott scored in that Monsters losing effort the other night. But Stephen Elliott scored. He had 14 goals last season. That was his best offensive season in the American Hockey League. And to be able to have that back on the blue line is a luxury. And then a guy who was just sent down to the Monsters from Colorado, where he played the first 5 games. A rookie from Sweden named Dennis Everberg. He's a 6'4" forward, has a lot of size, does a lot of the dirty work out there, while he does also have some good offensive instincts. Scored a goal in his second game with the Monsters. That was on Saturday night. But he's a guy who's, our head coach Dean Chenault said the same thing. He's a guy he'll get down and block shots. He'll go to those tough areas of the ice, and he's got the size to be able to play that physical game. But he also can move very well, and he has some good offensive ability.
Yeah, you talk about it, all of these things. But looking at the early season, it's funny. You mentioned something that you said was something that I was talking to my son about over the weekend when the Monsters dropped both of those games. I'm like, yeah, it's early season, and then you get caught in the stuff that we talk about. It's like, yeah, but man, Doug and I say it every year, man. The ones early count too, but so you get caught in that middle because you don't want to panic, a few games into a big long season. So you're like, oh well, but at the same time, we know because we talk about it, you and I, every week, that they do matter. You want to not fall off the edge of the earth early on in the way we dramatize things, but they are important, and especially no matter what your sport, as you know, when they're in your division, those are double time games right there. Those are equally as important, and pretty much the entire month, it's all in the division to start this thing off.
Yeah, they're big games for a multitude of reasons. I mean, you look at the way the games are spread out. The Monsters play Milwaukee 10 times. They play Grand Rapids 10 times. They play Chicago 8 times. They play Rockford 8 times. So every one of those games, it's magnified because it's like one ongoing story or saga against these teams as the season wears on. And when you play a team that much, you don't want to lose a couple. You lose a couple games to Chicago like you just did, and now Chicago feels like they've got the upper hand. They feel comfortable playing against you guys. And then there's more on that the next time you play them because you want to try and even out that season series and you want to win that season series because if let's face it, if you win all your season series against all your opponents, you're sitting pretty good at the end of it all. And then talking about there is no reason to panic. We're 4 games into the year, obviously. Nobody's panicking. Everything's falling into place, and I still think this Monsters team has some of the most talent that we've ever seen on a Monsters team in the last few years. But at the same time, you can't help but be realistic. I mean, you and I it seems like we always think back to that 11-12 season when the Monsters started 0-5-1. You pick up 1 point in your first 6 games, and then we come down to Game 76 against Rochester on the final Saturday night of the year, and if the Monsters win, they're going to the playoffs. And, so you can't help but think, you win one of those first 6 games, and that doesn't matter. You're in the playoffs, and you're just playing for positioning at that point. So I think that's why we always think about these October games having so much importance, and they do, because we've seen it happen to teams all the time in every sport, where you'll get to that final 7 to 10 days of the regular season, and you're a couple games in it or out of it or what have you, and all you can think about is, oh well, there was that stretch a couple of months back where if we could have just gotten 1 win here or 1 win there, everything would be totally different. So while there's no reason to panic while we're 4 games in, you still look at there's nothing wrong with looking at games as must-win games, placing importance on games, and I think this is a very important weekend. You want to make a statement against Grand Rapids again because you're going to see them so many times. You want to make a statement against Milwaukee and Rockford because you're going to see them, it's the first of a lot of meetings between the Monsters and those 2 opponents, and especially Milwaukee, who looks like they're coming out of the gate as the team to beat in the Midwest Division. They won their first 4, so there's going to be there is not a night off in the Midwest Division. There's not a night off in the American Hockey League, but at the same time, the Monsters are off to go 1-3 start. But I don't think that anything to be up in arms about. The team's too talented. It's a 76-game season for a reason. Things balance out the way they're supposed to, and this is going to be a good hockey game.
And they're on the road this weekend, as you said, big one, 3 of them here, Grand Rapids, Milwaukee, Rockford, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Then they come back home, Halloween. They'll be here. Texas will roll into the month of November, not just with games, but quickly, too. Tour with the Monsters back in the month of November once they're back here home more often and stuff. I know there's 2 of those coming up where they head to the area rinks and you get a chance to check out the practice and get on the ice with the team and take pictures and all of that stuff as well. That's one of the things I like, Monsters out there in the community. But that starts back up, I believe it's November 17th.
Well, we actually had one this week, just yesterday. There was one out in Shaker Heights. And then we've got a couple coming up in November. There's one in Parma and one in Rocky River coming up in the month of November, and you can get information about that on LakeErieMonsters.com. But always a good time had by all, and it's a chance for fans young and old to get out there and watch the Monsters practice, see how they do things out there when they're practicing. If you're a youth hockey coach, you might be able to go and pick up a couple new drills or something that you can take to your own team's practice, and then all the kids like getting on the ice for a half hour with the Monsters afterward to skate around, meet the guys, get autographs, what have you. So it's always a fun time, and one of those things that really, really stands out is just a fun thing the Monsters do in the community, free of charge, great access, and And, if you don't have skates, you can still come out and hang out at the rink, and you can still, hang out and meet the players. So it's a fun time had by all.
Yeah, absolutely there, Doug, and I wanted to make sure to mention that. Last thing I want to ask you, off the ice, World Series time. World Series, Kansas City, San Francisco.